You never expect the knife to come from the same hands that once fed you, held you, called you by a name only they were allowed to use, and that is why the wound cuts deeper than logic, deeper than memory, deeper than anything you can easily explain to yourself without shaking. You've carried this longer than you admit. There was a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when something shifted, when a look lasted a second too long, when support turned conditional, when love began asking for proof, obedience, silence, loyalty at the cost of your spine, and you felt it. But you told yourself family doesn't betray family because that belief felt safer than the truth pressing against your ribs. This is the point of no return because once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and the world you thought you were born into begins to fracture like glass under pressure. This is not about drama. This is not about bitterness. This is about power, blood, proximity, and the oldest betrayal pattern humanity has ever known. You are not imagining this. There is a reason the deepest betrayals rarely come from enemies. And there is a reason Machiavelli would never be surprised by family turning against its own. He understood something most people are never taught, because it would collapse too many comforting myths at once. Proximity creates access, access creates leverage. And leverage, when mixed with insecurity, fear, envy, and unspoken competition, creates predators who smile like kin. You were never crazy for feeling it. You were simply early to the truth. Family is sold to you as safety, as unconditional loyalty, as a sacred bond that transcends ego and competition. But that story was written by people who needed you compliant, not aware. Blood does not purify human nature. It concentrates it. When strangers envy you, they keep their distance. When family envies you, they sit at your table, learn your habits, memorize your weaknesses, and smile while doing it. This is where the danger begins. Not because they hate you, but because they know you. They know what scares you. They know what you want approval for. They know which version of you still seeks belonging. And Machiavelli would tell you this without mercy. The people closest to power are always the most tempted to seize it. You were born into a hierarchy before you ever chose one. Older siblings, younger siblings, parents, uncles, aunts, roles assigned, expectations enforced, invisible rules written long before you could read the room. And when you begin to change, when you outgrow the role they gave you, the system panics. Systems do not betray out of malice. They betray to restore balance. So when you rise, when you think differently, when you stop needing permission, when you heal in ways that threaten the old order, you become the disruption. And disruptions are neutralized, not celebrated. This is why the betrayal feels confusing. They still say they love you. They still call you family. But the support thins. The comments sharpen. The stories about you change when you're not in the room. You survive things you still don't have words for. And somewhere inside, you started to realize that loyalty in families is often conditional upon your obedience to who they need you to remain. The first psychological shift happens when you stop asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" and start asking, "What do they lose if I become myself?" This is the moment your life begins to make sense. Machiavelli understood that betrayal is rarely impulsive. It is slow. It is justified internally long before it ever becomes visible externally. They tell themselves stories. You've changed. Heck, you think you're better than us. You don't need us anymore. You forgot where you came from. And those stories are not about truth. They are about fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of losing relevance. Fear of confronting their own stagnation while watching you evolve. So they undermine. They minimize. They frame your growth as arrogance, your boundaries as disrespect, your silence as betrayal. And here is the cruel paradox Machiavelli would quietly smile at. The more independent you become, the more disloyal you appear to those who benefited from your dependence. You are not broken. You were never taught another way. You were taught to confuse sacrifice with love, endurance with virtue, silence with peace. But peace that requires self-erasure is not peace. It is captivity with a familiar accent. This is why the betrayal hurts more when you confront it. Not because you lose them, but because you lose the fantasy that they would ever choose you over their comfort. Here is the hidden threat most people never see until it is too late. Family betrayal is not always about removal. Sometimes it is about control. They don't want you gone and they want you manageable. Machiavelli warned that those who benefit from your position will resist any attempt you make to redefine it, and family benefits from access in ways no outsider ever could. They can guilt you. They can shame you. They can remind you of debts you never agreed to owe. And when that fails, when you no longer respond to emotional hooks, the tone shifts. Concern becomes criticism. Advice becomes surveillance. Love becomes leverage. This is where the danger sharpens. Because the predator in the family does not look like a predator. They look like tradition. They look like obligation. They look like we just want what's best for you. And if you're not careful, you will spend your life trying to prove your goodness to people who need you small to feel safe. It's okay to feel this. You're allowed to want more. But understand this clearly because Machiavelli would never soften it for you. The family member who betrays you is often the one who benefited most from your silence. Once you see that, the grief changes shape. It becomes clarity. It becomes distance. It becomes power waiting to be claimed. The door behind you has already closed. Ahead of you is something colder, sharper, and far more honest than the love you were promised. There comes a moment after the betrayal is recognized, not confronted, not announced, but felt when the noise inside you quiets just enough for something colder to speak. This is the core revelation, the one that changes how you look at every shared memory, every holiday table, every phone call that suddenly feels heavier than it should. Family does not turn against you because you failed. They turn against you because you succeeded in leaving the role they depended on. You were the stabilizer, the listener, the one who absorbed tension so others could avoid growth. The unspoken agreement was simple. You stay predictable, you stay included. And when you broke that agreement without ever signing it, the system responded the only way threatened systems know how. You've carried this longer than you admit. The quiet guilt of wanting distance without knowing how to justify it. The strange shame of outgrowing people who watched you grow up. You told yourself you were being dramatic, sensitive, selfish. You tried to explain yourself gently, hoping clarity would heal it. But clarity threatens those who survive on ambiguity. This is where Machiavelli would lean closer and lower his voice. He would tell you that power dynamics do not disappear in families. They become invisible. And invisible power is the most dangerous kind because you feel it before you can name it. You may notice it now, how conversations subtly pull you back into old versions of yourself, how your achievements are acknowledged briefly and then diluted, how your boundaries are treated like temporary inconveniences rather than permanent lines. You're not broken. You were never taught another way. You were taught loyalty without discernment, forgiveness without accountability, closeness without safety. Pause here. Let yourself reflect, not with rage, but with honesty. Who changed first? Who benefited when you stayed quiet? Who grew uncomfortable when you stopped shrinking? If this resonates, you already know the answer, even if you've never said it out loud, and you don't need to explain it to anyone. Sometimes recognition is enough to reclaim yourself. The emotional micro-moments arrive quietly after that realization. They come late at night, in small flashes, when you remember something that once felt normal and now feels wrong. A joke that cut too deep, a dismissal masked as concern. A moment you asked for support and were met with silence or subtle punishment. These moments are not meant to break you. They are meant to rewire you. You start to notice how your body reacts before your mind does. The tension before answering a call. The exhaustion after every interaction. The relief you feel in their absence, followed immediately by guilt for feeling it. This is the residue of emotional conditioning, not love. Machiavelli understood that guilt is one of the most effective tools of control because it convinces you to police yourself so others don't have to. And families wield guilt masterfully, often without realizing it, passing it down like heirlooms no one questions. But here is the quiet shift taking place inside you now. You are beginning to separate care from compliance. You are starting to understand that distance is not cruelty and silence is not betrayal. It's okay to feel this. It's okay to grieve people who are still alive but no longer safe. Each micro moment, each small sting of memory is teaching you something essential. Your nervous system is learning what your mind was never allowed to admit. Safety is not familiarity. Love is not endurance. And once that lesson lands, you can never return to the version of yourself who tolerated harm just to keep peace. You walk into a room where they are gathered, and something in you has shifted so subtly that no one can quite name it. But everyone feels it. You speak less, you observe more. You no longer rush to fill silence or smooth discomfort. You notice how quickly the old dynamics try to reassert themselves, how certain voices grow louder when they sense they're losing influence over you. You feel the pull to explain, to reassure, to prove that you're still the same, and you don't. You sit with the discomfort, steady, present, unreadable. You feel your feet on the ground. You breathe. In this moment, you are no longer prey. You are awareness. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. The shift from reaction to observation is the beginning of power, because the one who sees clearly no longer moves blindly. You hear the subtext now, the competition disguised as concern, the resentment wrapped in humor, the fear hidden behind advice. And instead of fighting it, you let it reveal itself fully. You don't confront, you don't accuse, you don't defend, you simply stop feeding what was never meant to nourish you. You survive things you still don't have words for, and yet here you are, standing, watching, no longer begging for permission to exist as you are. This is not rebellion. This is alignment. And the room feels it, even if no one says a word. There are threads still unresolved, questions that linger like unfinished sentences. Will they ever understand? Will distance turn into permanent loss? Will you regret this silence years from now? Machiavelli would not answer these questions directly because he knew something deeper. Certainty is not required for strength. Only direction is. You are learning to move without applause, to choose yourself without witnesses, to let misunderstanding exist without correcting it. And that unsettles those who are comfortable defining you. They may escalate. They may soften. They may pretend nothing has changed. None of that matters as much as this. You are no longer available for roles that require self-betrayal. There is a quiet power in unanswered expectations, in relationships that no longer dictate your emotional weather. You are not cutting people off in anger. You are stepping back into yourself with intention. And somewhere ahead, a final reckoning waits. Not loud, not dramatic, but inevitable. Because when you stop participating in distorted dynamics, they collapse under their own weight. You're allowed to want more. You're not imagining this. What comes next is not resolution, it is transformation. The rhythm breaks here, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with a strange stillness that feels heavier than any argument you ever rehearsed in your head. This is the phase no one warns you about, when the chaos fades and what's left is space, wide and unfamiliar, where old obligations once lived. You notice how quiet your mind becomes when you stop anticipating their reactions, how your body loosens when you no longer brace for subtle judgment disguised as love. And yet the silence is not empty. It hums. Because power does not announce itself when it arrives. It settles. Machiavelli understood that after separation comes recalibration, and recalibration feels unsettling because you are no longer oriented around other people's expectations. You begin to feel the absence of pressure like the absence of gravity, disorienting at first, almost frightening, because struggle had become familiar, even comforting. There are moments when doubt creeps in. You wonder if you were too harsh, too distant, too cold. But then you remember the cost of staying, the erosion, the quiet resentment, the way your spirit dimmed just enough each time you chose peace over truth. This is the rising suspense no one sees from the outside. The internal shift where you realize you are no longer waiting to be understood. You are deciding who deserves access. And that decision changes everything. This is where something subtle weaves itself into your awareness. Not as instruction, not as demand, but as recognition. You realize that others are walking the same quiet path, questioning loyalties they were taught never to question, feeling fractures they were told to ignore. And without trying to lead, without asking anyone to follow, your clarity becomes a signal. Not everyone will hear it, but those who do will feel less alone. Machiavelli believed influence was strongest when it felt discovered, not delivered. When people arrived at truth on their own and found you already standing there, calm, grounded, unshaken. You don't need to announce what you've learned. Your posture carries it. Your boundaries communicate it. Your silence teaches more than explanations ever could. If others choose to reflect, to look inward, to sit with discomfort instead of running from it, that is their journey. You are not here to save anyone. You are here to stop abandoning yourself. And in doing so, you become something quietly dangerous to dysfunctional systems. Not because you fight them, but because you no longer feed them. This is how power spreads without noise. Every family that betrays its own eventually reveals a truth it never meant to share. And that truth is this: love that requires your silence was never love, it was management. Click on the screen to watch the next video on how this knowledge changes what happens next, what most people never realize after this moment, and what you will start seeing differently from now on.